Hello everyone, welcome back to the KMTRADERS channel. So this is the full market analysis 132. So just looking at this week's analysis and comparing our analysis from last week as well. So we'll start off with gold. So what we're looking at from last week is pretty much this kind of, well, last video we're looking for price to kind of tap into 1680 and probably drop just a little lower. So interestingly, we've had some sort of rejection off that. So I think this is probably just like a fake move to entice people to, push up. But I think we can have one more step lower. So that's what I'll pretty much be looking for. And then we can start looking at for potential buys. But obviously we need to wait for momentum to kick to the upside. But pretty much I think the move for this week is pretty much a sell-off. So what we could potentially anticipate is something like this and then push down. Obviously it depends how far this pullback is, but we're expecting a downside move to take out 1680, take out that zone, and then we can start to look at some sort of rejection to the upside possibly. So we just need to wait. So what we can look at now is EU. So we take a look at EU. So we can see here with EU. So what I'm looking at for this week is one of the two things here which we pretty much touched on from last time, which was we're either going to look at a break to the upside or we're going to see move straight past down. And what I'm going to be then looking out for is pretty much just some sort of change in price or whatnot. So from that point onwards, I'm gonna basically move and pretty much just wait for price to do its thing, because it's kind of stuck right now. So it's more or less either going to break out and then push up to the upside, or we'll see price react to the downside and push a lot lower. So one of the two things is going to happen. That's what I'm thinking through this week. So just like I said, we just have to stay patient with that and see what's going to happen here, because it could be quite violent. I'm not entirely sure what will, how strong it will push, but there's something brewing up there. So if we take a look at NZD USD, so my thoughts on this is pretty much we're looking for a potential move to the downside. Just checking my notes. So even though we've had this kind of push to the upside, I'm still expecting some sort of pullback. So because the push up towards the upside is quite high right now, which I failed to kind of mention last time, I think the profits for the downside move could be quite profitable for this week. Again, looking at from a week perspective, not necessarily the bigger move at a whole. So this would be something, looking at something like this. To be fair, it could be better off if I just do this, but I'm looking at something like this. We'll either push up into 0.63, reject it, and take a dive down. The other thing is it really depends if we're going to break the low, so to tapping to 0.6, or we could hold this. So it's going to be one of the two, but I think I'm going to be looking out for this sell off pretty much. I'm not necessarily keen on buys just yet, but I think the sells are pretty much going to be in control at the minute. So yeah, so that's for NZDU. If we take a look at AU, I'm looking out for pretty much a similar kind of perspective again with NZD USD. Reason for this, I think, obviously confluences. I think obviously with the US dollar getting a little bit stronger, we could see price pushing lower. Again, I'm just trying to see what we could expect. So what I'm going to be looking out for is this idea that we could get a sell. So I've got one or two scenarios. We could get a sell-off here. So if we get price to sell off, reject 0.7, push into maybe 0.68, maybe 0.685, and have a push up. Here we're not necessarily sure, but it could push lower. So I'm just going to keep that perspective like that. The other option is we could just get price to drop and then see if I can look at taking some sells to the downside. So something like this. So we could get like a, maybe a huge sell-off and then like a retest, something like that. Or we could possibly place this to the upside. It could just look something like that. Make that annotation just a little bit easier. Or we could get price to I'm most likely looking at this, if I'm being honest, something like this. But obviously price can just do whatever it wants to do. So the other option is sells is going to control it, and it could just drop to the downside. So not necessarily sure what can happen, but this is the kind of ideas that I'm looking at. So if we start to look now into more towards the Japanese yen pairs, so what I've got labeled here is, we've got our channel, kind of broke towards the upside here, and we can see that prices dipping lower. So the kind of idea that I'm looking at is a potential move towards the upside, kind of like this rolling over motion. So pretty much we did have a nice drop in price. So price obviously gave a nice sell-off there very early in the morning on the 21st. So this is last week, to be fair, but starting off from this, so we can already see prices starting to kind of rally up. So if we kind of just move these annotations, we could either get 135 to hold as support, or we could just potentially break below it, possibly into 134, which is around here. Actually no, maybe 135. I think it should be able to hold that. If that can hold, then I still will be looking for buys. And then the idea for me for UJ is if we start to push up, I'm going to be looking at 140. I think that's got a significant kind of like rejection level potentially there, so just waiting for that to see if it can tap into that. But again, providing 135 holds, we'll be looking at buys. But if we do break lower, it will be more or less a retest trade, which we would obviously have to update for next week. But the idea for this week, personally, I'm going to be looking at more of an upside move. So if we take a look at CJ, CJ, a little bit difficult. We're still in this channel, so that's quite good. So I'm looking at 103 as our last kind of support level. If we can stay above that, I'm kind of keen to still buy. So again, we could end up pushing lower, making a move lower, and then go high, or again we could find 105 to hold, and then we could still take off towards the upside. So I'm looking at around 108, 109. We could potentially target this middle level, and then from here we're going to be looking at potential. Again, this is very future talking, but I'm looking at something like this. So maybe this is a few weeks ahead of the game, but kind of like looking at that kind of idea, and we'll see where the yen goes with the Canadian dollar, but that's kind of the basis for that. So with the EJ, I've got one or two things happen actually. To be honest, I think it's pretty much the same analysis from last week. We're gonna get either a price to push lower, so I probably will just leave this up here. So it could come back up and then fall down to the downside to head into 136. The other option is I'm looking at price to potentially swivel over back up to the upside to 143, 142, and then it could potentially drop back off to the downside. So ultimately we're still looking for that sell-off. So I think what's fair, I've looked at through my Japanese yen pairs so far, is just the the correlation that we're going to eventually drop off, or we've got some kind of movement towards the upside. So that's why I'm probably going to put this on the back burner for now, and leave this as like a secondary option. Obviously that there's no kind of preference, but in terms of the order that I would be looking at, I'd look for sells roughly around 141. If you find any rejections, and then possibly look at buys anything lower than 138. See if we can rally towards the upside from there. If that can hold, then we could end up pushing into 142, and then again, this is very few more weeks ahead, I think. So I think for this week we could expect this motion, but we'll have to kind of see. Last three pairs, so we've got AJ. So with this one, let me check my notes. So with this, the idea that I've got, okay, so the idea that I've got with this is that we could potentially push higher again, and then we're going to be looking for 97, 98 to be taken out, so potentially tap over there, and then we could see price push to the downside. So with that being said, we're most likely looking at for buys for this week. So again, the idea is probably we're expecting a push up for this week for majority of the Japanese yen pairs, and then maybe in the next 2 weeks, which kind of puts it in line with the NFP. And then also we've got the August period, the summer period to come in, so that can have an effect on the charts and whatnot. So we'll take a look into that, but ultimately looking at that, and then 92 is kind of my support level, so I don't really want to go anywhere beyond that. So we'll have to see what's left with that. So that's pretty much the Japanese yen pairs I've got. If we start to look at the last two pairs, so just the US dollar, so US dollar Swiss. So for this one in particular, essentially I'm looking for price to continue to push higher, so pretty much this kind of idea. So we'll either have 0.96 hold, and I'm using 95, 94 as a support. So if we break 94 or 94.5, if we break lower than that, I'm gonna be looking for possible sells. But obviously I'll probably review that next week. But if we start to rapidly push higher, I'm gonna hope that we can get some retests in this, because I feel like I've possibly missed this buy, but I don't think we're too late actually. EMAs are not really turned over, so until that happens, then we can possibly look at a pump to the upside. But if we do, if we are capable of pushing up, we're going to be looking at around 1, and then possibly anything higher than 1, especially if we get above this high here, 1.005, we could see some rejection. So I feel like it'll be quite difficult to pass this, but again, we'll just have to see. So that's for USD Swiss. We'll take a look finally now for USD Cad. So I've got mixed feelings about this one. I've got two scenarios, well, basically the same as last week actually. So we'll either get the 1.28 to hold. Let me get rid of these. So we'll either get this to hold. So yeah, we'll either get 1.28 to hold. If we can, then there's this possibility that we could rise up and then drop it down. The other option is if we start to push lower, we still could actually get this motion up to the upside, but this is the third scenario I want to bring in. So if we do get a break, I'm going to be looking for sells, and then I'm going to keep an eye out for any possible buying options, because it could start to rally back up into 1.3, and that's like a very favored spot for my idea, because I think we've got a lot of kind of testing around here. So I feel like price could definitely come back in at this point and kind of retest it and then reject and do what it needs to do. But that's all for this week. Next week I'm thinking it could get a bit more active, but I think this week should be okay with moves. We're heading into the summer period right now, so price activity could take a lot of time, So obviously try not to rush your trades, because I feel like they're going to take a little bit more time. So you know, obviously to develop and play out. So that's all that I've got for this week. If you did enjoy the video, leave it a like. If you got any value, make sure you're subscribed, and we shall see you all in our next week's video, guys.